and do a broadcast. So, okay, so we're gonna go live in terms of the broadcast in 3, 2, 1. You guys are live. Attendees are coming.
We'll wait until 6, correct? Good evening, everybody, and we welcome you today for our session. This is the first session during the pre-workshop for the hackathon, and I'll be very honored to be your host, Fahad Alshatti from Agility. And we're very honored to have our speaker today, Philipp from Media Lab, MIT Media Lab. Just to give you some notes, so this is the first sessions of a 3-day sessions. We're going to have the future of education, which is going to be with Philipp. And then we have another 5 sessions. We're going to be follow up, one at 8 p.m. today, and then we're going to have 2 tomorrow at 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. And on Friday, the same thing. On Thursday, the same things. And you can go to the KFAS.hackathon and you'll find all of these sessions and their times and links. So we encourage you to join us in all of these sessions, and all of these sessions will have some Q&A toward the end. I'll start with the introduction to Philipp. So Philipp is the Director of Learning and Innovation at MIT, which I think is one of the hottest subjects currently during the COVID-19, online learning, education, and all of that kind of segment. So we're honored to have him today here. Philipp's been in this sector more than 20 years, and he's been even active in other sectors and other regions. He's one of the sponsors of the Refugee projects, education and learning for refugees, and some of them are here in the region. I will welcome Philipp and give him the mic. Go ahead, Philipp.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. And I'm excited to be here with all of you. I understand that there's a hackathon that's going to go on after this. So I'm going to try to, in my remarks, talk about some of the work that we are doing at the Media Lab right now, but also maybe some of the challenges that I see in the broader space of digital learning. And then hopefully all of you can solve those challenges. And in my next talk, I can talk about the things that you've built and how you solve them. So let me say a couple of words about myself and the Media Lab, just in case you're not familiar with the Media Lab. So my path into digital learning has been through a series of projects, really. I co-founded an organization called Peer-to-Peer University. And the general idea was that we could use technology to connect people with each other online, and so that they could then learn anything they would want to learn. So it's very much a grassroots kind of movement, and peer-to-peer university is still going strong all over the world. I think not as strong in the Middle East as I would like, so hopefully we can still change that. I've also built some tools that people use. I'll talk about on Hangout in a second. We've built a large community for educators called Learning Creative Learning. Plix is the Public Library Innovation Exchange. And then I've done a fair amount of work in institutional innovation, working with colleges and universities, and also thinking about credentials. So it's like a pretty broad range. I would say that I get bored easily and excited easily. And so that is a bad combination. You end up jumping into lots of things. So one of the places that I am not bored of yet is the Media Lab. It's a really fascinating community of designers and engineers and artists and scientists. I think people often know about us for our work in technology, but it's really this combination of science and arts and design and engineering that makes the Media Lab so special. The conversations that we can have with people who are from different disciplines, not just our own backgrounds and our own disciplines. And one of the things that I think is important, when you walk into the Media Lab, it feels like a very different learning environment. It doesn't feel like a typical university or a school, and that is intentional. And I think the important maybe message to take away from that for people working on the hackathon are that interaction and communication, how we engage with other people, are shaped by the spaces that we're in and the context. And so you see a photo of the Media Lab behind me. It's very casual. People are sitting in small groups and working with each other. It's very non-hierarchical. It's a very unusual education environment. But for us as technology designers, and I think most of you on this call are technology designers, we have to keep in mind that our work shapes those spaces and contexts in which people learn. And so we have a big responsibility to be thoughtful and think about kind of the experiences that we're trying to create. Now, we are talking to each other today in a very unusual moment and maybe unprecedented moment, actually. And in some ways, it's exciting because I'm sitting here on the East Coast of the US. Many of you are sitting in the Middle East, but we can talk to each other. We can be part of a conversation. And in some ways, I think we weren't necessarily open to these kinds of experiences as much when we were able to get on planes and fly around the world. And it was just a much bigger effort. Now it's easy to set up a few calls and stream things live and just use that technology that exists. But of course, the challenges are much more important than the opportunities here. I will come back to the opportunities. I'm an optimist at heart, so I can't help focus on the opportunities. But I think the challenges are important to just visualize and also keep front and center here. UNESCO estimates that 1.6 billion children were sent home from school in the last 3 months. Nothing like this has ever happened before at this scale. Absolutely unprecedented. MIT, the university where I work, became an online learning university in 3 weeks. Like, we sent all of our students home, actually in the course of 5 days. And then we moved 1,251 courses online in the course of 3 weeks. And all of our teaching and learning for the second half of the semester was online. So, and we are not unique. Most universities around the world have done this. So thinking about kind of the changes to the education systems, so it's a particularly interesting time to be having this conversation. And I've spent a lot of time talking to people in my community about that experience in the last few months. Mainly talking to MIT students, MIT researchers, MIT faculty about moving courses online, being a student in an online course, and what was that experience like. And largely the feedback has been challenging. People have focused on things that were harder. And so just to name a few, the sense of community that you feel when you're together on campus, that's very difficult to replicate. The types of conversations that you have with other people, even though we can talk to each other on Zoom, there are many reasons why those conversations are not as easy or as engaging as they are in the real world. Finding inspiration and new ideas, something that you kind of pick up when you're in a space with other people, much harder online. Motivation, to stay motivated, to work, when you're on your own, maybe you're not kind of pushed by the other people. And then this notion of serendipity, and that is something that the Media Lab really cares about, these kind of ideas flying around in the air that you bump into by accident, that you didn't expect, the things you didn't expect, those things are very difficult to do online. At the same time, I'm very optimistic because I also see a huge amount of experimentation and creativity in how people are both kind of working at the cutting edge of what's possible today. So using tools like Zoom or others that are widely available, but using them in really thoughtful and creative ways, or even building new tools, like things that aren't available yet. So for me and for most of you, this is an exciting time. When I was trying to understand kind of what are some of the things that are now coming into starker or clearer contrast as we are all working online, I find this image extremely compelling. It's from a former colleague of mine at the Media Lab, Judith Donat, and it kind of shows, I think, how we feel at the end of a long day of Zoom meetings. It's like things are a little bit blurry. We feel disoriented. It's not a very pleasant experience. And I was trying to understand, like, how did we get to this place? Like, when we started thinking about the design of technologies, like, where did we put our emphasis? Where did we focus? And why maybe do we feel like this? And I think one hypothesis or one framework to think about this would be this one, that traditionally, a lot of our focus has been on content, right? The production of content, the distribution of content. How can we get that to more people at lower cost? And less so on people. the connection between people, the collaboration that maybe they work on together. And so when we think about content rather than people, and we start optimizing these systems, we will optimize content-based systems for efficiency and convenience, right? Like faster, cheaper, easier to find. Those are all the things that we have become extremely good at, actually. Now, when you optimize people systems, maybe you'll optimize for things like serendipity or experience. Those are things that are not efficient by nature. They're actually they have to be designed to be inefficient to create serendipity. Those are things that we haven't been as good at, and actually we haven't really tried to be as good at. So I think that is one of the big challenges that I see for the education technology space now, to shift a little bit our emphasis from content to people so that we can get better at supporting both. All right, I'm going to run through a few projects that I've been working on with my team and with others at MIT. And I hope that there are more kind of inspirations, like not necessarily that this is the perfect solution or this is the thing that everyone should do, but more, here's kind of a direction you could take with your work. And maybe this will spark some ideas for what you might want to work on. So the first one is, and they all start with the term designing, because I think of myself as a designer primarily, even though I didn't study design. My background is in computer science and economics. But I think of myself more as a designer these days. And so these 4 examples are always presented through the lens of design. So the first one is designing courses. And actually, it's maybe not courses, but let me start with this one. So one of our projects is called the Public Library Innovation Exchange. In North America and in Europe, we are big fans of the public library systems because they provide a non-formal alternative education platform. So when kids come out of school, they can go to the public library and they can access materials and courses and mentors for free. Very important. There's no cost you have to pay. And also, there are almost no limitations for who can access the public library. And so when, especially in the US, where we have a fairly unequal education system with some very, very good schools and some not so good schools, the public library can be a place where people who maybe are in a not so good school could go and access some of the learning opportunities that they may not have access to in their school. So we're big fans of public libraries. Public library systems are different all over the world. So I am prefacing my remarks with that because in the Middle East, they may look very different. So this is really based on kind of the North American and European experience. But anyway, we have this community of over 300 partners in public libraries all over the US and Europe. And we generally organize face-to-face workshops to bring them together so that we can then help them prepare to facilitate learning experiences in their libraries. Now, our last in-person workshop was planned for the end of April. And by middle of February, it became clear that that was not going to happen. MIT was, sending people home, and we weren't going to be able to run our workshop. So we had to shift. So we had to shift our workshop from face-to-face to online. And what we did is we tried to preserve kind of some of the design ideas behind the workshop. So we often think of great learning experiences as experiences that respect kind of the 4 Ps of creative learning: projects, peers, passion, and play. And so we try to really use those as design elements. And when we moved these workshops online, they became almost like mini courses. They're 3 weeks long. There's like a rhythm to each week. And the rhythm is that the week kicks off with a live event. We actually think live events are important, even in online. Like if you optimize for convenience, probably you want to optimize for pre-recorded video because people can watch them on their phones, on the bus, whenever it's convenient for them. But there's something magical about a live event when, dozens or hundreds of people come together at the same time and we get a sense of like, oh my God, all these other people are in the room. And we use a platform called Hangout, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it gives you a sense of like who is there, and it's a very participatory and conversational approach. So there's a live event at the start of the week. Then there are projects that the participants work on over the course of the week. They upload those projects to a shared, in this case, just a slide deck. And then they look at each other's projects and they give feedback. And then kind of at the end of the week, we start the next week by reflecting on the first week, and then we launch into the second week. So it's a very simple model. But the results that we've seen actually, I think, confirm our design ideas, which is we have almost 100% retention. So the people who come in the first week generally stick with the course all through the 3 weeks, which is very unusual, as you know, for online courses. Participants are extremely engaged. They come up with all kinds of ideas of how to make this course better. They come up with projects that they're interested in that we didn't even think of. And then the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is there are real hands-on projects that people are working on. Often in online education, we think that projects are too hard to do. They are not. They may get a little messier, but it's actually much more fun for the participants if they can work on something that are meaningful to them, rather than just kind of answer multiple choice questions. We are writing about some of these experiences. This is just a blog post. I'll quickly put a screenshot here. A few simple tips for better online meetings. So some of these things we're trying to share and kind of think out loud, and and actually get better at ourselves. We're by no means the perfect at any of these things. So the first one was designing courses, like a different vision for what a course could look like. The second one is designing materials, and this kind of builds on the idea of how do you support people working on projects when we're not together in the same space? And at MIT, that is a particularly important question because so much of our work happens in workshops with access to equipment and machines and things that you may not have at home. And we started kind of a mini version of this, again, with the public libraries, because we started putting the materials and the kits that they need into little boxes. We designed documentation, and the things you see behind me, that is an actual photo of the kinds of things we would put into these kits. And the box with the little turquoise handle, that is a plastic box that those things go in, and we just mail it out. And the idea is that you get everything you need to get started. Materials, documentation, but it's more like an inspirational kit. It's not recipes that you follow, step by step. And this work with the libraries then was very useful to reflect on when we had to start working on this in the context of MIT. And so the question now is, well, what does MIT in a box look like? Like, how do we package our courses for our students, and how do we send those things around? And fortunately, there are always some people in the MIT community who are one step ahead of you, no matter what you're trying to work on. And so we came across this course in architecture that is already sending out things in the springs, that was already sending out things in the spring semester to support the students working on their hands-on projects. And since then, MIT now actually is developing a policy and a system where we make it easier for our students. As a lecturer, I can register my course. I could say my students need to be able to order these things. And then the students can just come to this website. It's almost like Amazon, but just for the students. They select all the things that they need. They hit order. It gets reviewed on the back end, and then it just gets shipped out to them. So it's a much easier way of processing the ordering. They don't have to pay for anything and then get reimbursed. And so coming up with these kinds of systems that actually you could, as a school or as a university, if the students can't come to you, what could you send to the students that actually let them replicate their learning experience? I apologize for the background noise. That's one of the fun elements of these Zoom meetings, is you never know when your neighbors are renovating their house. And so I hope it's not too bad.
No, it's good, it's good.
All right, so we've redesigned courses, we've redesigned materials. Let's talk a little bit about tools. Tools, and by tools I mean, tools like Zoom, like the technologies that we use to interact and collaborate with each other. So I mentioned this before. A tool that we built in my group called on Hangout this is a research project. So it's not a production, like a tool intended for production necessarily, but it has actually been used by over 30,000 people all over the world now. But it was designed to be more participatory, where the people who are coming to the event are more in charge of the event. Like, they can create their own breakout rooms. They can change the names of the breakout rooms. You can see everyone who's there. You can always chat to everyone. And actually the presenter window is really small in the top right corner, rather than like the big window that takes up the whole screen. So it's kind of like the participants are in charge. And maybe they'll listen to you for a little bit, but maybe they don't. Maybe they'll just talk to each other in the chat. And one of the interesting things we found in a recent study is that we were interested in how do you help small groups of people to get better at talking with each other when they don't have a facilitator, when they don't have a teacher, and maybe they don't even know each other very well, that is a really hard and important problem in online communities, right? Like, you bring 6 people together in a breakout conversation. What do you need to give them so that they can have a good, meaningful conversation? Like, how much scaffolding is the kind of technical term do you need to provide for them? And our assumption was that one measure of good conversations would be that everyone talks roughly the same amount. And so, we just tracked how much are people talking compared to everyone else. And then we gave a visual cue. We showed the group kind of who is talking the most so that they could adjust their behavior. And one of the interesting findings was that actually the amount of time that people spoke wasn't the most important predictor for how much they felt they were being heard. And that is an important takeaway, because it's really not about the amount that you speak, it's more about your ability to participate. And maybe that means you're just saying one thing at a very strategic moment because you're a quiet person. And maybe it means you speak a little bit more, but you're being very respectful of other people's opinions, you're facilitating more, and that's why you're speaking more. So just speaking time didn't seem to be a good measure. And we're interested in, this is an area we are very interested in. It's like, what is a good conversation online, and what are the tools that we could build to support that better? And maybe what are the tools that you can build to support that better? And the last one I'll talk about is we've done courses, materials, tools, and now infrastructure. Because there are some things in education that I would consider at the infrastructure level that are important and interesting. And actually, if one could improve those, the impact one could have would be quite tremendous. And one obvious example is credentials. So, and by credentials, I don't mean just the high school diploma or the university diploma, but some kind of a statement from a trusted source about something that either you have done, that you're able to do, a skill that you might have, a project that you've completed. So it could be, a very broad range of what people refer to as attestations of learning or competencies or skills. And what we set out to build is a better digital system so that the people who receive them, the learners, can store them and manage them in their own, what we call a wallet, and then share them with other people, and they can be verified so that everyone can trust that the information in these credentials is actually true. Nobody can say that they have a credential that they don't actually have, and we have some ability to transact with these with a high level of trust. And so it's just a screenshot here because the technology is a little bit complicated to show on a screen, but the project is within the kind of umbrella of the Digital Credentials Consortium, which is a group of 12 universities right now. And we are building all of the tools that you need to issue these credentials, to store them, to share them, to verify them. It's all open source, but there's a lot of room for improvement and experimentation, and I think in this area of credentials and attestations of learning. And I said I was going to talk for 20 minutes. I'm 2 minutes over. So let me just wrap up with a few thoughts on challenges are clear. What are some of the areas where I think the most interesting opportunities exist? So we did talk a little bit about tools already, but there are some actually maybe even more obvious challenges with tools, which is one example I like to use is even when we're using a video conference, we are never actually looking at each other, because if we're looking at the camera, we're not looking at the picture of the other person. If we're looking at the picture of the other person, it seems like we're not looking at them. And so we have this weird disconnect where nobody's ever really looking at each other, even though we're all trying to talk to each other. That is a problem that is probably relatively easy to fix. So maybe that's something that some people might want to work on. Audio is a whole other challenge. These tools are designed for one person to be speaking, but actually great conversations happen when everyone is speaking a little bit or making noises. So how can we get better at supporting these kinds of audio communities? I think there's a lot of opportunity in the development of better materials for this more distributed model of learning, for better courses, for better communities. This is, I know, an area that some of you are interested in. And it's actually, I didn't talk about the projects in this space, but it's something that the Media Lab is very interested in, which is how do you involve all the different stakeholders in learning communities. So there's obviously the learner, the student, there's obviously the teacher. But then what about parents? How can we get parents more involved? Maybe there's another role, something like a guide or an advisor or a mentor, like who's not necessarily a teacher, but it's maybe someone who's kind of, you can reach out to. How do we connect all of those people? And how do we connect the students better to each other so they can support each other? I think there's a huge amount of innovation that's possible in that space. And then, as I mentioned before, credentials. So I'll leave you with this challenge. As I said in the beginning, interaction and communication are shaped by space and context. And you and me and us as technology designers, we have the power to shape these spaces and this context. And so I'm excited to see what, first of all, the questions that you may have for me or for each other, but also very excited to see what you come up with at this hackathon, because yes, we all need experimentation right now, and people working on this, I appreciate the time and effort that you're putting into working on this.
Thank you very much, Philip. I really appreciate it. And maybe I'm one of the lucky people. I've been to MIT Media Lab 4 times so far. And that's the reason we have a Kuwaiti there, Abdul. I'm sure you know him by now. So it's always, when we're in Boston, my second destination is always MIT Media Lab. I'll put it this way. So it's always a great place to be, and you get inspired as soon as you enter the door, as you said. It's an open space, open experience. People share thoughts and ideas in a more different way than anywhere else. So I hope more people from Kuwait will be there. And we hope some people from the hackathon in the future will be some of your students in the Media Lab.
That would be great.
Thank you. So one thing before we jump into questions. So if we're interested to use the Hangout and Hangouts for the track, is that possible?
So people are free to use it. As I said, so if you go to unhangout.media.mit.edu, you can just create an account. We actually don't track your email address. We just, you do need to have an account to log in, yeah. And you're free to use it and set it up. But as I said, it is a research project. So, you know, we may want to make some changes. We're not necessarily maintaining a 99.9% uptime. So there is a little bit of a risk. One thing I would say is, if you're interested in that space of video conferencing, the underlying technology that we use is something called Jitsi. It's an open source project that we use for the breakout rooms. And they are both very solid technology now and a great community. So if you're experimenting in that space, they would be a very good starting point. So just using the Jitsi code base, you can actually get quite far, I would say, in just a couple of days if you think about new interfaces and new experiences around video.
So again, if you can share to text us in the chat the exact domain or name of the company, that'd be great.
I'll do that.
So one of the tracks we have in the hackathon is an education track, and it's more something around the virtual classrooms and how to interact between the students and the teacher. We have further details we're going to announce on the day of the hackathon, but I think this is going to be one of the hottest tracks on the hackathon out of the other 5 tracks. So you gave everybody a very good head up for the hackathon on Friday. Thank you.
Good.
That's good. So Philip, I'm going to move away from MIT and I'll try to come back. I'm going to come to the region here. So you've been very active in the refugee camps, learning skills, and I'm sure there were similar issues before COVID-19 with the refugee camps and distance learning and getting the right skills and talents to there. Can you give us an overview about that experience even before COVID-19 and what kind of things you did there?
Yes, we ran a project called the Refugee Learning Accelerator, and it was actually more focused on supporting teams of engineers who were interested in working with refugees rather than working directly with refugees. And the reason for that is, you know, I think someone coming from a completely different context it takes time to really understand the context. And, you know, this thing in the background about technology design, shape, space, and context, it also means that you have to invest in really understanding the context of your users. And, you know, someone who's sitting in Boston, flying to Jordan or Lebanon and spending 3 weeks there, I will never be able to fully appreciate all the subtleties of the context of refugee learners. So what we decided to do rather was to focus on young engineers, mostly students from universities across the region, who were interested in refugee education, and then giving them kind of a framework and some tools that we thought might be useful in the projects that they wanted to build. And they were, they were living in the region. They were much more aware of the challenges, of the issues, and so then they basically partnered with local nonprofits and started developing tools. And just some of the examples that came out of this were, there's a reading app called Kindi, and it connects. It's gone through a few variations, but the basic idea was that you would connect people reading storybooks with children who would benefit from being read too. Because reading storybooks is one of those absolutely crucial elements of developing literacy. We know how important it is, but not everyone has access to someone else reading, or if you're trying to learn English, someone else reading in English. So the Kindi team thought maybe they could connect people willing to read storybooks with learners who would benefit from accessing that. I thought that was a really interesting idea. They work with the school in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. There's another app that built a more of a kind of a mini Wi-Fi hotspot that would contain all the information and content that you would need, that you could then bring to a refugee camp essentially, and students or anyone with a tablet or a smartphone could access the materials that would be provided through this local hub, but you wouldn't need access to the internet. It was solar powered, so reliable electricity wasn't such a requirement. So it was I mean, for us, it was a great experience. We felt like our approach to innovation and technology design and prototyping was a useful experience for the participants. At the same time, it was also hard to see the challenges that these refugee learners are facing, right? It's lack of access to great schools, lack of access to teachers, lack of access to technology. It can feel a little bit overwhelming when you see all the challenges. And so our experience has been that there are a lot of people who want to do something about it, and there's a real need for more people with technology skills and expertise to get involved, because technology can make a big difference. It's not going to be the solution, but if you work with a local nonprofit and you add technology to what they're doing, maybe they can reach more people. Maybe they can get a little more efficient. Maybe they can do things a little bit differently. And then your technology skill can actually make a huge difference. I haven't seen a lot of applications where technology alone really solved the problem. So that's not to say that that's not possible. If you think about YouTube, it's a huge store of educational content, or Khan Academy. So those things can make a huge difference. But my experience from working with these nonprofits and with these teams of young people was that it's really this combination of organizations, people, communities, and then adding technology into that was very powerful.
So one of my first questions from the audience, it's Jitsi, is it an API or it's full software?
It's full software. It's fully open source. You can host your own, set up your own Jitsi server. They also maintain kind of a publicly accessible version of their software at meet.jit.c. I think it's a little confusing. It's a different domain, but it's fully open source.
So one of the other questions, again, like to your third point, it's people and parents and adapting to this online education system and getting almost 1 billion students going to be online. Any thoughts on that? How can we convince, I mean, this is a big issue here in the region, parents and adopting with this online education and not being very protective, especially when they're in the classroom now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to get comfortable with doing things in a different way. And, that's always difficult. I think change is always difficult. The research that looks at the efficacy of online learning versus in-person learning is pretty convincing that if it's a regular class where it's, most of the class is someone explaining something and presenting something, and the students are listening and taking notes, and then they're working on problems on their own afterwards and maybe submit them, the research is pretty compelling that the results are as good in well-designed online courses as they are in in-person environments. Where things get harder is these project-based things, right? So traditional education is actually fairly easy to move online. Non-traditional education, which I think is what's missing in most education systems, the more project-based work, the more creative work, those things are much harder to do online. So if you're a parent who is worried about moving the traditional experience online, I think you can be quite confident that your children are still going to learn the things that they are learning when they're sitting in the classroom and listening to someone talk. I think then it's more around the motivation and making sure that there's still that social connection, because sitting in front of a computer by yourself is a lot less fun than sitting in a room with other people and then going to break. And, you know, like, and especially for kids, that social component is so important. So I actually think as parents, maybe that's the thing to put more emphasis. It's less the academic rigor, it's more the social component, so that the students feel motivated and they want to learn and, you know, they're supported. I would worry more about those things probably.
Yeah, so we have one of the questions from the hackers on that hackathon. So it says, if you're going to give me advice when I'm building my product on my track, what will be the most important criteria I should focus on for an online education platform?
That question is so big that's almost impossible to answer. You know, I hate to say this, but it really depends on what are you interested. So maybe this is a way of answering. It's like, I think the most important thing is understanding what problem you're trying to solve. So really spending the time understanding what is not working or what could be working differently or what are you hoping to do, and then talking to the people who would be using it and understanding how they would be using it and how they may use it in ways that are unexpected to you. And especially if you are from a different background than your user. So let's say you're 25 and your user is 12, you know, maybe you can imagine what it was like to be 12, but you're not 12 anymore. So really trying to figure out, like, how would a 12-year-old feel about this? So so I think the most important thing is really being very, very clear on what is the problem that you are trying to solve.
Our next question, one of the audience is asking, I mean, how can I build an education platform for an age 0 to 6?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And I can actually see the question here, substantive learning, psychological development. So not everything can be replaced by technology. You know, I think that's kind of what you're asking. And I would agree with your maybe reservation. I do think that there are, you know, 0 to 2 is a very difficult age to do anything with technology. 2 to 3, maybe things are starting to get a little more possible. I'd say 3 to 6, there's quite a lot you can already do. You know, and one example, which is from the 1970s, actually, is Sesame Street. There was such well-designed educational content that actually, and it's based on research and, you know, lots of experimentation, lots of tests, that, you know, it seems quite useful for kids. I mean, some of my friends start watching it with their kids that are not even 2 years old. I think that's a little young, but definitely from age 3, 4 upwards, it seems feasible. And then, you know, if you can use technology to create social maybe experiences around it. So if the parents maybe are not as comfortable with some of the cognitive tasks that the kids could engage in, you know, when they're that age, 2, 3, 4, and they start experimenting forms and shapes and concepts, and, you know, there's a lot of pedagogy that exists there, building tools that would support that, and then maybe adding instructions or background for the parents so that they know what's going on, even though it's not necessarily something that they're themselves supporting, I think would be good ways to address some of the challenges there. Should I can read the questions actually in the channel now, in the chat. There's one at the beginning about online educators. So I'll answer that one, and then I also want to answer the other one about post-COVID. So online educators, one thing that I think is a common misperception is that the quality of your materials has to be really, really high. And actually, the misperception is the word quality, because the quality does need to be high. But what the research shows is it's not the recording quality or the background or how good the lighting is or how many uhs you say. Like it doesn't have to be a perfectly done TED Talk that's 12 minutes long where you never stumble, you never get anything wrong, and the slides are all beautiful. That's actually not the case. The learning videos, so those learning videos are great, don't get me wrong, but the amount of effort you have to invest to make those things is crazy. And so especially if you're starting out or you want to maybe try out some things, things that work much better are actually things that feel more genuine. So what people don't like is being lectured at, but what they love to hear is people kind of grappling with questions. And there's a famous video of someone one of my mentors, Mitchell Resnick at the Media Lab. He leads a research group called the Lifelong Kindergarten Group. He developed something called Scratch, which is an online platform used by young people, by over 20 million young people all over the world. So he's an absolute role model in this space. There's a famous video of him where he's trying to debug a Scratch problem. So he's in a Scratch project, and Scratch is a little bit like a programming language, but visual. And he's trying to solve a problem. It's not doing what he's trying to do, and he can't figure it out. So, and he's talking while he's doing it. He's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to try this thing. He moves the blocks. It's not working. Actually, maybe I'll try this thing. And it's one of the most widely watched videos. And it's, I think, one of the best teaching tools, because for students, they see this process of debugging, of trying to solve the problem. And also that you don't have to get it right the first time. It's like nobody, even Mitchell Resnick, who invented Scratch, didn't get it right the first time. So I think some of those, like, just keeping that in mind, conversational things, maybe you're sitting in your office and you're like letting people see what's really going on in your mind. I think those are better strategies than investing in camera equipment and lighting and all those kind of things. And then there was a question about post-COVID. So I think it was a UNICEF report, either UNICEF or UNESCO, a few years ago, way before COVID. It had nothing to do with COVID, but it was about kind of disaster response. And I really appreciated the way that they framed the report. They said, of course, we now have to invest in a response to this disaster, because there's, kids aren't in school. There are all these things that we just need a short-term, a band-aid to fix, this urgent solution. But let's invest in things that will actually make the system better when the crisis is over. I think with COVID, it's not clear that the crisis is going to be over anytime soon, or that there won't be another crisis. I just read about a new swine flu from China this morning in my newsreader. So maybe this is going to be a little bit more the new normal. And so investing in good technology and good practices and good training, and I think is always going to pay off. It's always makes sense. And then the other thing is, let's do things better, even if we can come back together in person. Like, for example, this event, right? Maybe we wouldn't have thought about doing it this way with people from all over the world Skyping in and connecting, because it was too expensive or too complicated, or people would say, no, we want to be together in person. And so we would lose the ability to actually connect with this global community. So I feel like the things that we're doing now, some of those are actually better. They let more people participate. So let's make sure we don't lose those again when things go back to a slightly different future.
So I agree with you, Phil. I mean, there's lots of good practices. I mean, for me, instead of going to the work for an hour, sometimes I stay at home, finish work instead of this commuting time. And I think that's going to be the same thing. Yes. Spending some more time on studying and focusing instead of commuting. So we hope that's going to be some of the challenges. We have two more questions.
Actually, I admit I've not been paying attention to the Q&A as much as I have to the chat. So
Yeah.
the people who posted in the chat.
I'm moving them to the chat area. So the last question.
Okay.
So you can read the last question in the chat. Feel free, and I'll move the good questions to the chat area.
All right. So the last question in the chat that I see is about well, that's sneaky. Someone just added another question, so I'm going to ignore that one. There was a question about assessment and accreditation that I think a lot of people are thinking about. So I think there are two answers to this question. One is the more, I think, ambitious, maybe fundamentally challenging how we think about learning answer, and one is the more tactical. Okay, what can we do now? So the more tactical is there are some tools and technologies that make it harder for students to misrepresent their work or their achievements. You could have question banks that get rotated randomly. There are some open source projects in that area where instructors are sharing their questions and their answers. So you get access to a much larger pool of potential questions. There are some commercial services. You can pay textbook publishers to get access to their question banks. There are some more kind of, I don't want to say surveillance tools, but in a way they are. So they will film you while you're doing your work, or you have to authenticate by holding up a photo ID, and then it tracks your face and makes sure it's really you. I personally am not a huge fan of those. And I think once you're in this like arms race with your students, it's not a good sign, right? Like, if you're investing in more and more technology to prevent them from cheating, and they're getting more and more ingenious at cheating, it's probably not where both of you should be spending your energy. The more kind of, I think, radical answer, and I think the more interesting one is, if it's easy to cheat on your assessments, maybe they are not great assessments. And I don't mean this to be facetious or challenging. At the Media Lab, for example, we do almost all of our work in projects, and students are working on projects that they have designed with help, obviously, from the instructors. But each project is different. And then at the end of their time, they will share those projects. They have a portfolio where they can share the project. They talk about their projects, and they reflect on the project. And it's very easy to get a sense of how thoughtful is someone, how much work have they done, do they really understand the work of this project, or have they had a lot of help from someone else, and maybe actually their contribution was fairly small. So if you move to a learning system where students learn by working on projects that are meaningful to them, that are unique, that are diverse, cheating actually becomes less of an issue, because one, the students have less incentive to cheat because they're not evaluated on a kind of a grid where everyone has to do exactly the same thing. Everyone can do their own thing to some degree, but also it's very easy to see how reflective and how much work they've actually done on this project. But it does require a more fundamental shift in how education works. And if you have large students and you need to present progress and grades, I understand that this is a big challenge.
So Trump approval of this non-credential working force will affect you at MIT.
Wait, say that again.
Trump, he signed a document 2 days ago that working has basic skills versus degrees. The President Trump, he signed like a document 2 days ago that people can get hired even if they don't have their degrees.
I am not familiar with that, so I'm not able to comment.
Okay. Okay. So okay, I'll end this session with one last question. So you've been with this new world. What was the most inspiring project you saw during the COVID-19 on the education side? Some feature or some project, MIT, emerging countries, something which really turned you on?
Let me think about this for one moment. I have an answer, but I want to make sure that there isn't anything else.
Take your time. We're not in a hurry.
So I have two answers, but neither of them have to do with education directly.
Sure.
one is in many communities here in the US, something called a mutual aid society or group emerged. And what that means is just people who live in a neighborhood basically reaching out to each other and saying, you know, I am young and healthy. I can go to the supermarket. Who needs someone to go to the supermarket? Or you know, older people reaching out and saying, I can't leave the house. I have a pre-existing condition. I'm running out of cleaning materials. Or even things where I saw some notices where people said, can someone call me? I'm lonely. And then other people would respond and they would say, give me your number. I'm going to call you right away. And that sense of communities coming back together. And this may be a very local thing. So maybe this is a case from the US that really people in the Middle East are like, this is crazy. Our communities have always been doing this. But I think there is kind of a trend away from communities that's enabled by technology, unfortunately. And we're seeing a moment in time where both people are using technology to come back together, but also they're realizing that the people that they live with are really an important part of their local environment and that they should be investing in these relationships and supporting each other. So that's one. And then the other example is from MIT, and it's not something I was directly involved in, so I can take no credit, but the School of Architecture and Planning students, they set up an internal internet radio station. And they found an online tool that made it very easy. And you can go to the website and it's called What Are We Doing? WAWD. What are we doing? And it was just like this initial question is like, what is going on here? Like nobody has any idea. And they started streaming these shows. And sometimes it's people talking about their work. Sometimes it's updates on COVID. So it's like very, you know, important information. Sometimes it's music. People are just playing playlists and it's like nice to tune in because you feel like connected to the community. Sometimes it's people reading poetry. I mean, it's like, it's all the weirdness and all the crazy human interests that our communities have, but it's like it's enabled by technology. We can come together as a community in a new way. So I should think about more education examples. So I'm sorry that my examples may not be so applicable to the teams, but those were two things that really stood out for me.
Again, I really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate your busy time and giving it to the Kuwaiti audience here. And we hope later on, when the results are out, we'll share them with you and get your feedback on them.
Please do, please do. I'm excited to be a part of this. Thank you for the invitation, and good luck to all the teams who are hacking.
Yeah. And we thank again the audience, and see you again at 8 o'clock with Haider Musawi on his session. And thank you again for everybody to being here tonight. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.